Welcome to One Planet Conservation Awareness. And today we're joined by Amelia from the Sloth Conservation Foundation. Earlier in the week, we launched our fundraiser that we're trying to raise money to help these guys in Costa Rica build sloth bridges and increase their research output. Amelia, thanks so much for joining us. Can you start off by giving us a quick introduction to yourself and how you ended up working in conservation?
So I'm Amelia. I'm from London. I'm obviously not in sunny Costa Rica at the moment. I'm in dreary London. I got into conservation really through my university. I went to the Royal Veterinary College. Always knew I wanted to work with animals. Kind of always thought that the only path would be veterinary. And so I kind of went along that path and then realized, no, absolutely, that's not what I want to do. So while I was at that university, I took a lot of animal behavior ethics and welfare modules, and some of that then encompassed conservation. And that's when I really realized, oh, I don't have to be a vet in order to work with animals. And then from there, obviously the conservation field is really, really competitive. And the main thing is to have experience. So I just sent out dozens and dozens of emails to every conservation organization or rescue center that I could find. And so I've done quite a bit with different sorts of animals all over the world. And then I fell into the Sloth Conservation Foundation exactly through this way, just by sending an email, having a 3-month volunteership. And as things do in the South Caribbean, they often don't run on schedule. And so my volunteership ended, kind of hadn't really done what I went there to do, and decided, you know what, this is not the worst place to spend my time. So I decided to spend another 3 months there to do what I went to do, which was track sloths in the wild. And yeah, it's over a year later now, and I still live there. And I still work.
You fell into the world of sloths.
I literally fell into the world of sloths. Exactly.
Before you went there, did you know much about them, or have you been learning sort of as you go?
I really knew next to nothing about them. I knew all the myths, which I've since learned are completely, there's so many myths out there, and most of them are completely untrue. I didn't know much. I've learned completely on the job. Which has been great. And I did not realize at the time that the Sloth Conservation Foundation was run by Dr. Rebecca Cliff, and who is the biggest sloth specialist in the world. And so I've kind of hit the jackpot a little bit, because then after, when my volunteership ended, they were like, if you want to stay, we'll pay you. And I was like, okay, I can live in paradise and work with sloths. That's absolutely fine.
So having worked with them now, and I'm sure you're also quite a sloth expert, what would you say is the thing that gives you the most interest and the most passion with sloths? Why are you so passionate about working with them?
Because they are so strange. They fall into their completely own category of mammals that go against so many rules that we know. For example, mammals, they regulate their own body temperature. That's a fact. Except for sloths. Sloths can't regulate their own body temperature because their metabolism is so low. They don't have the energy to expend on keeping themselves warm. And so they're literally a bit like reptiles, in that they have to sit in the sun to stay warm, and they have to keep out of the rain in order to not lose too much heat. My favorite thing about sloths is their strength, for sure. They are 3 times stronger than a human being. That is not only because of the architecture of their muscles, which is different to ours, and their muscles pound for pound are stronger than ours, but it's also to do with the way the muscles are arranged within their bodies. So they have 52 muscles in their arm only.
Wow.
And those muscles are all connected from their wrists all the way up to their chests. And so, there's that saying, I think it's Archimedes said, if I have a lever long enough, I can move the world. And that's exactly the sort of theory that sloths put into practice with their muscles. And because everything's connected, it builds so much strength that their pulling is so strong that they can literally hang from one arm for hours, and it's not going to expend any energy because they don't have the extra energy to expend. Their pushing is very weak, a lot like an alligator or a crocodile, where you can tape their mouths shut and they can't open their mouths again, although that their closing strength is so strong. It's exactly the same sort of idea with sloths, that they can't push, but they really can pull. And you know, if anyone's ever being grabbed by a sloth, you know, like you really need someone else to pry that open, because you're not going to get out of that. And the thing that really surprised me most was how unchill they are. Like, you have this idea that they're just like sleeping in the trees and they're really chill and like they're this pura vida lifestyle sort of thing, which on the whole is true, as long as you don't bother them. And then if you bother them, they can be so aggressive. And I did not realize how aggressive. I didn't realize they have these humongous teeth. The two-fingered sloths have these humongous teeth in their mouths that are razor sharp. And that when they're grabbing you, what they're doing is they're trying to get your whatever body part they've got in their claws, they're trying to get it to their mouth so that they can bite you.
Surely, surely they don't need these teeth to, you know, they're not carnivores, are they? Why do they need such teeth?
It's purely protection.
Okay.
From what we can understand, because they're absolutely not carnivores. They are obligate herbivores, foliivores actually, which means that they only really eat leaves. Like that's 99% of their diet in the wild will be leaves, which is the same as the three-fingered sloth. And the three-fingered sloth don't have these teeth. So it is quite strange that the two-fingered sloth have these massive pseudo canines and the three-fingered sloth doesn't. And the only real idea is that it's for protection against predators.
And why would sloths need to evolve such strong, like a strong hold? Why have they evolved to hang in the trees rather than, you know, like a monkey does, running along branches? Why have sloths decided to hang?
Because they have such a slow metabolism. They have the slowest metabolism of any land mammal. They do not have the energy to expend in like a monkey does, like swinging and moving. And so this is a purely energy saving method, is to stay as still as possible and therefore move as little as possible. You need to be strong enough to hold yourself into that tree and still not expend much energy. And so that's why they've got this lever system, because it really doesn't take them much energy to hang and to hold on. And what does take the energy is to then move.
And the energy budget and moving of the sloths is what I gather is the focus of your research. So could you tell us a little bit about your role in the research that's going on with SloCo, with the sloths in Costa Rica?
So our main project at the moment is the Urban Sloth project. And so what we're doing there is comparing the energy budgets between sloths that live in an urban area, such as a town, and sloths that live in an optimal rainforest environment. And so we have these VHF tracking collars so that we can find them. And then also we have these specialized backpacks that collect a huge number of information and data about what the sloth is doing, such as their respiration rate, their temperature. But the real important thing, in my opinion, is that it detects differences in pressure. So it can tell when the sloth is ascending and descending from the trees. So what we really want to know is how much more time is an urban sloth spending on the ground in comparison to a sloth in a optimal rainforest environment. One of the well-known facts about sloths is that they should only be coming down to the ground to go to the toilet once a week. We are finding that urban sloths are having to come down to the ground so much more often than that because the canopy has become fragmented. These are arboreal animals. They only live up in the very tops of the canopies. But when we have destroyed the canopy in order to make room for roads and buildings, they then need to find other ways to get around. To do that, they either come down from the tree and then crawl across the ground, which is obviously very, very dangerous for them. They aren't built for crawling. You've seen those massive claws that they have. They really can't push their bodies up and walk like a quadruped. They're not built for that. And so not only does it expend a huge amount of energy for them to crawl down from the tree, crawl across to whatever tree they want to get to, and then crawl back up, it also makes them very vulnerable. They're crossing a road, vulnerable to car strikes, vulnerable to people, obviously the pet trade and the what I like to call the prop trade. So sloths being used as photo props and tourist attractions is a huge issue around Central and South America, but also just people crowding the sloth wanting to take photos. That's going to stress the sloth out massively. And also a huge problem, especially in the South Caribbean, is dog attacks. And there are tons of dogs, stray dogs and own dogs, who run around freely without their owners. And these dogs are going to attack the sloths if they find them on the ground. Another way that sloths can get from tree to tree, if there is fragmentation within the canopy, is by using the power lines. Obviously, just by saying that, like, we know that that's a dangerous thing. But especially when the power lines are not insulated, which is the majority of the South Caribbean, and when they are insulated, unfortunately, the material is not very good quality. And in an area with such high humidity and a lot of salt water as well, because we're right by the ocean, the material degrades very, very quickly. So even if it is insulated, there are often bare patches along that line that the sloth can touch and become and get electrocuted. And I think it's something like 80% of electrocuted sloths will die. So the main thing of our research is to see how often do the urban sloths have to come down to the ground? How much is urbanization impacting the lives of sloths in comparison to those to their counterparts living in the optimal environments, where ideally they should only be coming down to the ground to go to the toilet?
So can you tell us a little bit more about how you actually collect this data? Because obviously you can't spend day and night watching the sloth and watching for them to come down. Can you tell us a little bit about the equipment that you use?
Yeah, so we use the VHF. So VHF stands for very high frequency radio collars. So we literally go around with like a little receiver box and an antenna in the rainforest, trying to find where the sloth is. And so that's so that we can keep a track of where they are. Sloths are creatures of habit. Really, they're only going to favor around 5 or 6 different trees. So it's really easy to be able to predict where they might be. Sometimes they like to go off for miles and miles and miles. Maybe if something scared them, they will go off and then we have to try and find them like that. And that's a lot more difficult and to take a long amount of time. Those collars can stay on for around 2 years. However, the backpacks have a life of around 3 months. So it's very important that the collars are on so that we can find the sloth and retrieve those backpacks, because those backpacks are collecting all the data in like a little microchip. And the only way that we can then collect that data is by retrieving the sloth and taking the backpack off of it. So we plan to collect 3 months worth of data per sloth.
So if you've tracked your sloth, you found him hanging in a tree with his backpack, how do you get that sloth out of the tree?
So we need specialized tree climbers who also know how to handle sloths. So we have 2 members of our team who are currently going through a tree climbing course. And both of these guys also have worked in rescue centres and know how to handle sloths. In an ideal world, these sloths are going to be low enough that we can just do a very quick grab. And so having the guys go up and climb the trees and get the sloths is kind of our last resort. We will wait a couple of weeks, track every single day to see, okay, are you coming lower? Are you coming lower? No, you're really wanting to stay 14 meters high. Okay, then we have to call in someone to come and like wrangle you. But we'd much rather them just be a bit lower so that we can do a grab. So hopefully we'll catch them at some point when they're coming down to the ground to go to the toilet.
And you don't fancy adding tree climbing into your repertoire of skills?
You know, I think I'm going to pass that one up.
Leave that one for the experts.
I really don't fancy having to wrangle a very angry sloth out of like a 20-meter high tree. That's not something I want to add to my repertoire of
I think
skills.
maybe best left, hey?
Left to the professionals, for sure.
If people were to give to our fundraiser to help, donate to you some funds to get these backpacks and collars, how would that money directly be helping the sloths?
So that would be directly funding the equipment. So it's not just a collar and a backpack. It's also the receiver and the antenna, both of which are extremely expensive pieces of equipment. But then whenever we go and find these sloths using the radio collars, we are also gathering a lot of information. So we have to get, for example, the height in the tree. Now we need a special piece of equipment in order to do that. We also need another special piece of equipment on top of that in order, it's called a foliage filter, in order to be able to, the laser can like beam through the leaves to get to the sloth, which is another cost on top of what's already an expensive piece of equipment. We're also measuring the noise pollution in the area. So we have a decibel meter. There's loads and loads of different pieces of equipment that go into collecting what looks like not a lot of data, but it's like a lot of equipment that goes into that. And unfortunately, all of this equipment is really expensive because it is specialized. Especially those backpacks have been pretty much designed by our founder, Dr. Rebecca Cliff, in order to be specialized for a sloth. And the collars as well were designed by Dr. Rebecca Cliff in order to fit a sloth. Obviously they look like these like big chunky animals, but that's mostly fur. Their necks are actually really small. The three-fingered sloths even smaller. We can't use the same collars for a three-fingered sloth that we can use for a two-fingered sloth, because the three-fingered sloths have necks which are probably the size of my wrist.
Wow, it's tiny.
Tiny. And so it's a lot of equipment. Unfortunately, also the environment that we're in is not friendly to electrical equipment. So then we need specialized storage to keep all the humidity away from that equipment, because otherwise it's very expensive pieces of equipment that just aren't going to last the 5 years that this project is going to take.
Well, it certainly sounds like a big operation, but this research is vital research in protecting the sloths, and it also guides the SloCo towards the solutions to dealing with these problems. Without the research, then how do we expect us to know how to deal with these problems? And later on this week, we'll be speaking to another member of SloCo to find out exactly what those solutions entail. So Emilia, thank you so much for joining us and giving us an insight into your work and the amazing research that SloCo are doing to protect the sloths. And if you guys are interested in helping out, then please do check out our fundraiser that was launched earlier this week, and keep an eye out for our next video where we look at the solutions of what SloCo are doing to help deal with these issues. Emilia, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon.
See you later.